Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Burki. How are you?
Oh,
Thank you.
you're on mute.
Oh, yeah. Stop.
I'm good. Thank you. How are you guys?
Hi, welcome. I'm glad you were able to join us.
Yes, I was in my seclusion the last 10 days of Ramadan.
Hmm.
So I took myself out for 1 hour to to stick to my commitment that I made to Sam.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
being here. As a rabbi, just so one of the things that we did in synagogue on Saturday was announce the new month, which starts on Thursday.
Hmm.
So same for you, right? So I, of course, announced that also that we were in the, Ramadan, and that the new month would be ending out Ramadan as well, even though the new month is Nisan, which is the month that Passover happens in. But it was just sort of, it's an awareness of different calendars, when
Yes.
some are lunar and some are solar and some are, right. Right.
Yeah, Islamic calendar is goes by
Only
a
lunar,
lunar calendar.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
we
it's
often talk about how Ramadan can travel around the calendar, and
yes, yeah.
the best time is when it's in winter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Our new calendar will start I on the 16th of July.
Aha.
Yeah.
Ah. And what month is that for you? The first called.
Yeah, that's Muharram.
Okay.
Muharram.
Muharram. Okay.
That's got to be challenging, I think, for us. Our month of fasting always ends on Nowruz. It always ends on the first day of spring, and
Mm.
so it's easier to plan for. But I
Yeah.
can't imagine uh, fasting. My daughter lived in a Muslim village in Senegal 1 year when the fast was in the summer. The Muslim fast was in the summer, and she said it was just brutal, just
Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
the long days.
The days are very long. We have after Ramadan ends, there are 3 more months. And then it will end the calendar and we'll start the new
Mm.
calendar. We call it the Hijri calendar. Hijr means migration. That's when the Prophet Muhammad migrated from Mecca to Medina. And so our calendar starts from that particular year.
Uh-huh.
So in the current year, I don't want to, I think it's either 622 or 662 Common Era.
Mm-hmm.
622 Common Era.
Yeah. It's interesting because the Jewish festival calendar starts with the month of Nisan, which starts Thursday.
Hmm.
And because it's primarily a lunar calendar, as you know, it's the lunar calendar is 11 days shorter than the solar calendar.
Mhm,
So that's why
mhm.
Ramadan rotates. So
Yes,
what the Jewish calendar does is it adds an extra month every now and then, 7 out of 19 years, because they want to keep Passover in the spring in Israel.
I see. Okay.
So they sort of adjust the calendar to make sure that that always happens. And I think it's interesting to think that the time that would mark Mohammed's pilgrimage rotates around the calendar. It,
Hmm.
it's actually kind of nice when you think about it, that it covers all the seasons eventually.
Yeah, not his pilgrimage, his migration.
His migration. Okay, sorry. I apologize.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting that. I will now remember that better.
Hey, Alan. Hey, Arnold. How are you guys? Hi, Lon. So, I imagine that there's going to be more people trickling in. But I would actually, it's recorded, so we are going to share this on our YouTube page and other avenues. And I think just in the interest of time, especially since we have four speakers, I think we'll get started actually, and then have people come in as they can. So first, just if you guys don't mind, would you guys introduce yourselves? I'm going to start with the person who's first, whose screen is up first for me. So I'm going to start with Lynnette.
Oh, thank you. I'm Lynnette Riggio. I am a layperson in the Catholic Church. I'm very honored to be with rabbis and doctors of the other religions. That is wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And I belong to the parish at St. Elizabeth in Rockville, Maryland.
Awesome. Thank you. Rabbi Potts, you're next.
I am a rabbi in the Jewish community. I think of myself as a free range rabbi, although a lot of my teaching does take place at Temple Shalom in Chevy Chase. And I live not far from St. Elizabeth's.
Okay.
I live just off of Montrose Road. So,
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
and I mean, I am a rabbi, not a lay person, although there are things where I do have a lay function, like rather than a clergy function.
Gotcha.
So
Awesome. Thank you. And then Dr. Costello.
Hey, I'm Amy. I'm also not a clergy person because the Baha'i faith does not have clergy. We have elected groups of people who sort of administratively manage the affairs of the community, and so I'm the secretary for the assembly in Rockville that manages the affairs of the Baha'is of Rockville.
Awesome. Thank you. And Dr. Burki.
Yes, I am getting trained as a Muslim chaplain, and I'm associated with Boston Islamic Seminary, which is enrolled in a divinity program, master's program, which is, I think, 3 years. And I'm delighted to be here. I've been in a couple of sessions before today as well.
Thank you. So actually, returning, Rabbi Potts, Dr. Costello, and Dr. Burki have all actually been at a previous forum. Lynnette, this is your first time, so thank you. And the way this works is, so it's sort of a little bit of a round robin. I gave you guys 10 questions to help kind of prepare. I can tell you right now, we're most likely not going to get to all 10. And the goal is always discussion. So if we get to 3 questions and the discussion is great, that's what we would love. So please, especially for our individuals and listeners too, if you guys have any questions, please put your hands up and ask them, and I will call on you. So first, I am going to start with our first question. And
actually,
yeah.
Sam, if I could just ask,
Yeah.
We had an email conversation about me offering a reading
Yes.
about a
Thank
prayer,
you.
a prayer for peace first. I can close with that, but I just thought maybe.
No, let's start with it. Yeah, it
Wonderful.
slipped my mind, so thank you for reminding me.
Okay. And I offer this prayer as part of healing and inspiration to work together. It's written by Alden Solovey, who is a poet. When peace comes, when the tunnels are gone and the walls come down, when we sing together as brothers and sisters, we will remember these days of sorrow and grief, of rockets and terror, of longing and despair, as a memorial to those who were lost, as a remembrance of our mourning, as a monument to our yearning on the road to wholeness, on the road to wisdom, on the road to our days of rejoicing. O you children of Abraham, you sons and daughters of Sarah and Hagar, what will you become? How long before Shalom and Salam echo in these hills, in these valleys, and on these shores, as shouts of awe and amazement? How long before we remember to hold each other dear? One God, maker of all, banish war from our midst, speedily bring forth justice, understanding, and love. Bind these wounds and heal our hearts. On that day, the children of Ishmael and the children of Isaac will dance as one. Joy will rise to heaven, and gladness will fill the earth.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. Alan, you have a question? I think you're muted. Is the staff there at you, Jeff? Can you guys unmute? I think I saw somebody. I think they're trying to unmute. Question. What is it, Alan?
What's new?
Not much. Not much with me. What's new with you?
April 23rd. My birthday's coming up soon.
Birthday's coming up.
October.
Awesome. Hey, well, we're going to get started, all right? So our first question is about divine imagery. How does your tradition speak about God using feminine language, imagery, or metaphor, if at all? And what does that reveal about the divine? And let's start with Lynnette, just because you're, like I said, visually, you're the first person that pops up for me. So, yeah.
Sure. Okay. So in the Catholic faith, we believe in a Trinitarian God. So that's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we generally speak of God in terms of the masculine and the church as in the feminine. This just reflects the traditional imagery and the language of God as Father. God is neither man nor woman. You know, this also aligns, we align with the Hebrew and Greek language used in the Bible, which often use the masculine pronouns. So it doesn't negate the feminine at all, just a kind of convention or tradition. But, you know, we'll probably talk further too, that scripture does talk about God with attributes using the feminine as well. And so, for example, like a mother, God has carried humanity, and in particular, his chosen people within his own womb, and he has given birth to it in travail and has nourished and comforted it. So, you know, it's we don't specifically, you know, say that God is man or God is not man. We don't think of God as being male or female. And one of the things I think our catechism of the Catholic Church says it much better than I can say it. It says that God transcends all creatures, you know, so we must therefore continually purify our language of everything in it that is limited, image bound, or imperfect, if we are not to confuse our image of God, who is inexpressible, incomprehensible, the invisible, the ungraspable, with our human representations. So our human words are always fall short of the mystery of God.
Rabbi Potts.
So I'm so glad that Lynnette brought up the Hebrew and Greek masculine usage. Hebrew has this problem that now they're trying to fix, which is that it's a gendered language. There's masculine and feminine, unlike Latin, which had second declension and third declension neutral. There doesn't exist. So for the most part, in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, God is described using masculine verbs and masculine language. In modern usage, we've been expanding the Hebrew language to include more gender inclusive. And certainly when we're translating now into English, because English does give us the ability to use gender neutral, we don't use the masculine for God. In addition, this term, which actually is in a later question, but I'm going to talk about it right now. We talk about that God has no physicality, and therefore isn't male or female, but has certain attributes that one might think of as feminine or masculine attributes. And we use the term Shekhinah to refer to some of the feminine attributes of God. And that Yud He Vav He, or what we would say now is Adonai, which Yud He Vav He does not spell out Adonai, just to be clear, might represent some of the masculine attributes. And the name Yah, which we all know from the end of the word hallelujah, is also one of God's names, which is actually in a feminine form. So there's a lot of flexibility in how we use names of God that communicate different attributes of God, both masculine and feminine.
Awesome. Dr. Costello.
Hey, same. We God is unknowable, but to help us understand him, because that's a hard thing to grasp, we do also use the construct of God in sort of a masculine form, with the understanding that God doesn't actually have a gender. It just makes it easier for us to think about him if we use a gendered pronoun that is familiar to us.
Thank you. And Dr. Burki?
Yeah, Islam does not describe God using explicitly feminine language or pronouns because the Quran emphasizes that God transcends all human categories, including gender. So, Arabic as a language uses masculine grammar as the default for the divine, but this does not imply that God is male. Instead, the Quran employs, or rather emphasizes that the metaphors and attributes that include qualities often associated with femininity, especially mercy, nature, gentleness, care, life-giving care, are associated with God. A key example that I'd like to draw your attention to is the connection between God's name. Al-Rahman, Al-Rahim means most merciful. And the Arabic word Raham means womb, suggesting protective and maternal compassion, if you will. And prophetic traditions also compare God's mercy to that of a mother, if you will, for her child, yet emphasize that God's mercy surpasses even that. Similarly, God as Rabb, which means sustainer, conveys nurturing, growth, and provision. So theologically, Islam avoids calling God mother or using feminine titles to preserve divine transcendence and to prevent anthropomorphism. Nevertheless, the Quran portrays God as embodying both majesty, power, justice, and beauty in the context of mercy and tenderness, encompassing qualities beyond human gender interactions. So that's how God is defined or understood in Islam.
Can I just interject that in the Hebrew is the same, that Rachamim is from Rechem, which means womb, and it's very different in Greek. Hyster, which is the word that is the Greek word for womb, is where we get the word hysterical. So just sort of the different connotations there, but I just sort of wanted to say that there's some wonderful shared pieces of language there.
All right, so our next question has to do with sacred texts. Where do we see women playing spiritually transformative roles in your sacred texts? And what do those stories teach us about holiness?
Would you like me to start or?
Yeah.
So, women in the Quran play pivotal roles at moments of spiritual transformation and demonstrating that holiness is really defined by faith, courage, and devotion, and not gender or social status. A couple of women who are referenced and talked about at length include Mary, who embodies purity, deep worship, and trust in God despite social stigma, and showing that closeness to God arises from sincere devotion. Another woman who is praised is the mother of Moses, who models courageous faith by entrusting her infant to God's protection and teaching that surrender can be an act of strength. Asiya is another woman who is Pharaoh's wife, represents resistance to oppression, proving that true faith can flourish even in corrupt environments, if you will. And then Queen Bilqis, who is known in the Western literature as Queen Sheba, illustrates transformation through wisdom and humility, accepting truth despite her power. And then the daughters of Shoaib, one of whom got married to Moses, demonstrate modesty, integrity, and practical righteousness in everyday life. So, what these stories tell us about holiness across these narratives, and there are several Quranic principles that emerge, that spiritual rank is independent of gender and power. Second, trust in God often requires courageous action. Third, holiness may arise in private devotion or public leadership. Fourth, moral clarity can exist even within corrupt systems. And lastly, that transformation is possible at any stage of life. So overall, I would say that Quran portrays women as agents of divine purpose, whose stories show that holiness emerges through trust in God, moral courage, humility, ethical action, whether it's done in private devotion, family life, or public leadership.
Thank you. Dr. Costello, excuse me.
Hey, sure. So your question made me think of Pahareh, who was a poet and an early Baha'i. And so the Baha'i faith started in the 19th century. And the principle of the equality of men and women was an important thing from the very beginning. And so her story is that there was a large conference in the 1840s, and many men came and one woman, and she was the woman. And she was eloquent, and they knew her from her writing and her correspondence, but they had not met her in person. And one day she appeared in the meeting without her veil. And that was a devastating change at the time because all women wore veils and they did not appear in public with men they weren't related to. And it threw the whole meeting into disarray and there was turmoil and chaos. But her courage exemplified the new teaching that men and women were going to be equal. And it sort of made it a reality for the rest of the people who were at that conference. And ultimately, she paid a price for it. It was ultimately the authorities sentenced her and put her to death several years later. But she was in her courage and her wisdom, she modeled that for us for the very first time. And so she was remembered for that.
Thank you. Rabbi Potts.
So as I thought about this question, given where we are in the Jewish holiday calendar, Esther came to mind, and I'm wearing a t-shirt and you can't see it, but I'm going to read the names off of it, which are Miriam, Moses' sister. This is all Passover. Yocheved, which is Moses' mother. Batya, the who was the princess, the daughter of Pharaoh, Zipporah, who was one of Moses' wife, the wife we know about for the most part, and Shifra and Puah, who were the midwives. So, and in fact, in the Haggadah, which is the story and the order of the service that we have for the Passover meal, the rabbis have a line that says, had it not been for the women of the Passover story, we would never have been redeemed from Egypt. So as the Passover story is sort of like the July 4th, I want to say, of the Jewish people, to think that the rabbis thought their agency was so important is a very significant thing. They weren't necessarily listed as the spiritual leaders. They weren't in charge of ritual, except for Miriam, who, after the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, led the women in song, right? But we end up having, I just want to sort of go through this, that from Sarah on, it's the women that in many ways are the drivers of making sure the covenant continues from generation to generation. So again, when we talk about agency, and even to this day, Jewish law says that if your mother is Jewish, then you are Jewish, which creates all sorts of problems because the tribes go through the fathers. So you can have a Jewish mother and no tribe, but it's okay. We just solved that problem. But again, the notion of the connection to the people is through the mother. And even when we get to the holiday of the Feast of Weeks, which is 7 weeks after Passover, we read the book of Ruth. And Ruth is then the model of a person who says, I'm going to throw my lot in with your people, and your God will be my God, and your people will be my people. And again, we have another woman. So from sort of like Purim through the Feast of Weeks, all of these holidays, we have women driving the stories. And it's just sort of an important notion of the role of women in those holidays, in the narrative that sort of focuses the people, but even the Shifra and Puah, who were the midwives, are considered these important, they're considered to be the first acts of civil disobedience because they refuse to honor the Pharaoh's order. So again, it's the women. So
Thank you. And Lynnette?
Yeah, there are so many stories in the Bible about women and how they played such a transformative role. And thank you, Rabbi, for talking about the Old Testament. I figured you would, so I was going to, I was pulling from the New Testament. The first one and primary one that definitely speaks to me is Mother Mary. And Dr. Burki, you mentioned Mary, and for us as Catholics, she is the first one that I think of. She is the one that I try and emulate, her holiness and her faith. You know, she bore God, you know, and so it's just really she had this great important role. And but in the Gospel of John, there are seven women, seven very specific areas that are featured prominently about women being decisive in spreading the good news of Christ. So you have Mother Mary at the wedding feast of Cana. She essentially kicks off Jesus's public ministry by saying, "Do what he tells you to do." When they had run out of wine at the wedding, and Jesus does his first public act, first public miracle. We have the Samaritan at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, and she spreads the news to her community, and they come and ask Jesus and his disciples to stay for a couple more days. And she brought these people, and they said, we first came because of you, but now we're staying because we've met him, that kind of thing. I'm not going to go through all 7, but one I'll just close with is Mary Magdalene. So she was at the foot of the cross with Jesus, along with Mother Mary and with John, the beloved disciple. And Mary Magdalene was the first to encounter the risen Jesus outside the tomb. And Jesus instructed her to tell the disciples that he is ascending to his Father. This highlights that significant role as the first witness, being a woman in that particular case, to the resurrection, and emphasizes, I think, the personal relationship between Jesus and his followers. So I like, Rabbi, how you spoke about the women continuing to keep the covenant and everything. And I think it's definitely the nurturing nature and things like that were and as Mother Mary said, she held all of these things in her heart and pondered them. So I think that's where that comes from. Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is feminine as attribute. Are there qualities traditionally labeled feminine that are considered essential to spiritual maturity in your faith? And Dr. Costello, start with you.
And please call me Amy. Yeah. So I was thinking, and we have a metaphor. We say that men and women are like the 2 wings of a bird, of the bird of humanity. So if one of the wings isn't developed, the bird can't fly. And so there are qualities that we think of as more masculine. There's qualities that we think of as more feminine. But among the human race as a whole, if all the qualities aren't developed, then we are not going to make progress. And so there is a passage that I wrote down because I liked it, and it said, the world in the past has been ruled by force, and men have dominated because many of their strengths kind of play in that arena. But the balance is shifting, force is losing its dominance, and mental alertness, intuition, and the spiritual qualities of love and service are strong in women, and those are becoming more important in how society works. So I think everybody has access to all sorts of qualities, but those are the ones that we think of perhaps as more feminine than masculine.
Thank you. Dr. Burki?
Yeah, in Islam, many qualities are often labeled feminine, such as compassion, mercy, gentleness. However, and these are, and emotional awareness, these are central to spiritual maturity in Islam. However, the tradition does not treat them as gender specific. They are virtues required of all believers, men and women alike. But the core, I would say, feminine coded virtues in Islamic spirituality are mercy and compassion, rahmah. And the Prophet said that merciful are shown mercy by the most merciful. And so compassion towards family, towards strangers, animals, enemies, and so on is this true sign of faith. The other quality is the gentleness and forbearance. And again, prophetic teachings repeatedly praise gentleness over harshness. Humility and receptivity to God, is also one of the qualities, and deep faith involves reflection, introspection, and openness and surrender, and attentive listening to the divine guidance. And the Quran describes successful believers as those whose hearts are soft and responsive, not rigid or arrogant. Then patience and perseverance, which we call sabr. It includes endurance, emotional steadfastness, and it kind of reflects, you could say, an inner resilience rather than outward aggression. Loving and kindness and care is another quality, and which is referred to as in Arabic as ihsan, means doing what is beautiful and benevolent beyond obligation, such as caring for others, forgiving, and acting with excellence. And why these qualities matter spiritually in Islam is because it aims to cultivate the heart, not merely the outward compliance. And these traits counter arrogance, foster social harmony, reflect divine attributes, if you will, in human character, and enable sincere worship and ethical conduct. So, Islam does not frame these virtues as feminine versus masculine. Instead, it presents it as the ideal that the believer should integrate: majesty, strength, justice, and then beauty, mercy, and forgiveness.
Thank you. Lynnette.
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, and when I was thinking about this, it um, really took me back to I'm getting ready to facilitate a study at our parish on feminine women, femininity, and women's role, and this really not came about, but what precipitated it, I think, is Pope Paul VI at the closing of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council in December of 1965. So I know it has a little date on it at this point, but he made specifically an address to women that I think speaks to this very specifically. And to quote him, he started off by saying, "And now it is to you that we address ourselves, women of all states, girls, wives, mothers, and widows. To you also, consecrated virgins and women living alone. You constitute half of the immense human family. As you know, the church is proud to have glorified and liberated women, and in the course of the centuries, in diversity of characters, to have brought into relief her basic equality with man. But the hour is coming. In fact, it has come when the vocation of women is being achieved in its fullness. The hour in which women acquires in the world an influence and an effect and a power never hitherto achieved. That is why at this moment, when the human race is undergoing so deep a transformation, women impregnated with the spirit of the gospel can do so much to aid mankind in not failing." And he closed with this final statement. He said, "Women, you do know how to make truth sweet, tender, and accessible. Make it your task to bring the spirit of this council into institutions, schools, homes, and daily life. Women of the entire universe, whether Christian or non-believing, you to whom life is entrusted at this grave moment in history, it is for you to save the peace of the world." And I just thought, in light of everything that's going on in the world today, that, what a strong statement to make about the qualities, the feminine qualities that are important and looked at as being essential to spiritual maturity. So. Sam, I think you might be muted.
Yep,
Yeah, okay.
you are. But I think I'm next if you want me
I-
to go while it works itself out again. Okay. All right. So first of all, I want to say I love the metaphor of the bird and the notion that we've made certain attributes feminine and therefore put them on as women and therefore not what men should be, or certain attributes that are masculine and that's what men should be and women shouldn't, rather than having people be whole and that everybody has some of these attributes is sort of I think one of the dilemmas we have in our world. And in Exodus, where Moses and God are having a conversation, and we use this phrase over and over again in our high holiday liturgy, where God is described as merciful, gracious, slow to anger, and full of mercy. And, it doesn't say, oh, God's feminine aspect is given to that. It says those are God's attributes. And to sort of, and I love the fact that we try to hold on to that, and that as has been said, this notion of clothing the naked. And then we get the rabbi say, what does it mean to walk in the ways of God? And their answer to that question is to clothe the naked as God clothed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and to feed the hungry, and to bury the dead. And all of those kinds of things are what it means to walk in God's ways. And it's, I think that is what is the best in all of the faith traditions, is when we work towards those tasks. Okay.
Remind me, everybody, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back,
okay.
Sam.
All right, it worked itself out. Everybody answered that question, right? Am I missing anybody? Okay, awesome. So this next one is mysticism in the feminine. Is your mystical or in your mystical or contemplative traditions, does the feminine hold a unique symbolic or theological role? Lynnette, would you start for us?
Gotta take myself off mute. Thank you. So yeah, in the Catholic spiritual tradition, this the soul is often spoken of in the feminine, and it's spoken in that way to emphasize the essential receptivity before God. And so there is this idea of spiritual marriage as the culmination of the spiritual life in which the soul is espoused to Christ. And in the espousal, every human soul, whether it's man or woman, takes on that role of bride in relation to Christ being the bridegroom. And this goes along with the church being spoken of as feminine in terms. And I just give that background to then talk about the mystics. And this was an area I wasn't as familiar with until recently. But the mystics in the Catholic faith are those people, either male or female, that have spiritually progressed to a very intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. And in our faith, two famous mystics of the church include Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. And they have used the term mystical marriage to designate that mystical union with God, which is the most exalted and consummate, most exalted condition attainable by the soul in this life. And it's also called a transforming union. So consummate union, deification. So Saint Teresa, she calls it the seventh resting place of the interior castle. So she talks about how we are raised to this level, and she speaks of it only in her last treatise, which she composed 5 years before her death, when she had just recently been raised to that degree. So that's what I thought I would focus on here, is because the mysticism for me was something that you haven't traditionally or typically in my upbringing, we didn't really talk about mystics in a way. And so that really made me search a little bit more and see, well, what does it mean in our faith, and how is that term used within our faith?
Rabbi.
So that question led me to two different sort of paths. One was, and I'll flip the order I was going to say them in, only because you were talking about the mystics, Lynnette. So I'll just stick with the mystics, which were the Kabbalists who were in Sfat, Israel, it wasn't Israel, in Sfat in Palestine during the Ottoman Empire. We're talking 16th century. And they came up with the imagery of Shabbat as being the bride or the queen. So this notion of welcoming Shabbat in and as welcoming the bride or the queen was, sort of this imagery of Shabbat as the day that God set aside and was blessed to be the queen, and to be as excited, I want to say, welcoming the Shabbat as you would be welcoming your beloved, is part of what the mystics gave in terms of imagery. But the other thing is in Kabbalah, the 10 sefirot, the 10, I want to say, let's just say in the emanations, that it's a balanced tree of masculine and feminine, much like Amy's wings. So in the mystical tradition, we still have this balance of what would be considered masculine and feminine as well, rather than it being one or the other.
Awesome. Amy.
So it's interesting. So like Lynnette, I am not, I live in the practical world, and I'm not, there are some mystical bits to our faith, but they're not much that I've studied. So I thought the one unique role for women in the Baha'i faith is motherhood. And that is a serious obligation, and it is a noble thing. And I thought about what Rabbi Potts said, and I thought, well, that's very similar. Motherhood in Judaism is just as critical, because it's how the faith is conferred. Like and they talked about women maintaining the culture, but it's also how you become Jewish. Is your mother sort of bestows that status on you. And so for us, the mothers are called kind of to a higher purpose, because we are the first trainers, the first educators of our children. And it is an essential role that cannot be neglected. And in fact, it's so important in the Baha'i faith that it's a rule that you educate your children. But if you can only afford to educate some, or if you're not able to provide education to all of them, you're to prioritize the girls, because that's how education can be disseminated through a population, is if the mothers are educated. So it's interesting to think about that from a Jewish perspective as well.
Dr. Burki.
Yeah, in Islamic mystical tradition, especially Sufism, the feminine holds a powerful symbolic, not literal, but symbolic role. Again, as I said earlier, God is not gendered, but feminine imagery is used to express key spiritual realities from a Sufi's perspective. For example, receptivity, the soul often described as feminine because it must be open, right, and receptive to divine guidance. Divine beauty that we call Jamal, and qualities like mercy, tenderness, and love are sometimes expressed through feminine symbolism in Sufism. Sufi poetry also often portrays the beloved in feminine form to symbolize beauty and intimacy with God. And then there have been female saints, Sufi female saints like Rabbi al-Adawai, who exemplified profound spiritual authority and love-centered devotion. And then, most of the speakers have talked about maternal instinct. So maternal mercy, the linguistic link between mercy and the womb, reinforces nurturing imagery for divine compassion. So in essence, the feminine in Islamic mysticism or Sufism symbolizes receptivity, love, beauty, and mercy, and not a female god, but the qualities through which the soul draws nearer to the divine.
Thank you. So with the time left, I think I might open it up to questions to our listeners, and if not, then we can go back to the next questions. But does anybody who's listening have any questions? Alan, Ali, Raina, Arnold? I think you guys are all muted, so if your staff is there, please unmute so they can ask their questions.
Turn. Pastors is coming.
Say that again?
Also, clearly, Passover is coming next month.
It is, yeah. It's coming up. Alan, do you have any questions?
What you with the family?
Good. Yeah, everything's good.
Excellent. What
Do you have
with
any
the
questions
birthday?
about the topic, about the about spirituality or anything, Alan? About religion?
Religion.
Okay.
Religion.
Mhm.
Ali, everybody at Rayner, if you guys could unmute. Okay. All right. Let's move on to one more question. We have a little bit of time left, so I'm gonna try and fill it with. I muted myself. All right. The next one is leadership and authority. How has your tradition navigated the question of women's spiritual leadership, and how is that conversation evolving today? Rabbi, would you start for us?
Oh, sure. So it is an evolution, I want to say, that for much of the time, Jewish community leadership, when the temple stood, I want to say, which was 515. I'm going to do Second Temple, around 515 BCE to 70 CE. The temple officiants were male priests, and starting in around 200 BCE, approximately, the scholars, for the most part, were male. We called those scholars rabbis, and because we don't have the role anymore of temple priests, we now use that title for both the officiants for our synagogues as well as our scholars. They're rabbis, but rabbi really means teacher. So, and those were male, and yet there were many communities where the head of the community might have been a woman. What was significant, though, after the destruction of the temple was this term I'm going to use. It's called Mikdash Ma'at, which is the small sanctuary, that after the destruction of the temple, the sanctuary became synagogues and persons' homes. So, and keeping kosher, following the dietary laws, following certain obligations of tzedakah, of charity, and things like that became responsibilities in both of those venues. But one was considered, I'm going to say, public, and therefore more male dominated for the most part, and one was considered private and more female dominated. So, and both were critical to the continuation of Judaism. In modernity, the boundaries between public and private have shifted a lot, as have, therefore, these roles. It isn't that public and private have disappeared, it's that the roles governing public and private have become much more inclusive of women's leadership. Here I am, a woman who's a rabbi, right? And but also the home is no longer sort of, and I'm going to use a Yiddish word, the balabusta, the woman's domain to run and have control over. It's now, things are much more, I want to say, shared leadership, shared responsibility, shared obligations. And yet there's a continuum of how that operates within Judaism. Not all of Judaism operates in the same way in relationship to those things. There is a continuum. So I just sort of want to say that, but it's evolving.
Great. Dr. Burki, would you continue for us?
Sure. So, in Islamic tradition, affirms women's full spiritual equality, while it historically limits some form of public ritual leadership. The Quran presents men and women as equal in faith and accountability, and early Muslim history includes highly influential female scholars, most notably Aisha, who's the wife of the Prophet, who taught leading male companions and issued legal rulings. Classically, most jurists permitted women to lead other women in prayer, but restricted leading mixed congregations, largely due to social norms and interpretations of precedent and concerns about modesty. And despite this, women have exercised substantial spiritual leadership through teaching, scholarship, hadith transmission, and Sufi guidance. So today, the conversation is evolving. Many Muslim communities increasingly support women as scholars, chaplains. I mean, I'm a case in point where I'm becoming a Muslim chaplain, educators, and community leaders. And some advocate even broader ritual roles. Politically, women have held many significant, powerful positions throughout the history. They've been warriors, they've been rulers. In the modern history, in Pakistan, my home country, Benazir Bhutto was elected twice or thrice as prime minister. So there is that aspect as well. In essence, I would say that Islam has long recognized women's spiritual authority, though public roles were often constrained by historical context or social norms and so on. And but in the modernity, there are discussions and expanding opportunities, while at the same time negotiating the tradition and changing the social reality. So those are in the process right now.
Thank you. Amy.
Hey, yeah. So the concept of leadership, right? So 27 years in the Air Force, and I do think about leadership every now and then. Um, and as a pediatrician, I love the story of the midwives. Like I cannot read that story without it taking my breath away. It stops me in my tracks every time. And so I had pulled out a quote from an early leader in the Baha'i faith giving a talk in London in 1911, and he said, "The woman has greater moral courage than the man, and she also has special gifts which enable her to govern in moments of danger and crisis." And the story of the midwives reminded me again how that may be true. And in practical terms, I looked up the numbers today. There's 10 Baha'i communities in Montgomery County. We elect our leaders, and of those 10, I hadn't realized it, but eight of the communities have elected women as their secretary, which, as you can imagine, is a position of service, but it's also the person who organizes the focus of the community. So I think just starting in a different time and from a different place, it is women taking leadership roles has not been maybe the challenge that it would have been had we started earlier.
Great. Thank you. And Lynette?
Yeah, I would say that the Catholic Church is very open to women being spiritual leaders. And I think this was kind of the theme that we've heard. And you can see it in the canonized women saints that have attained the title of the doctor of being doctor of the church. So that is like our highest uh, category. And the doctor of the church is a saint recognized by the Catholic Church for their significant contributions to theology and doctrine, and they're characterized by their holiness and teachings. So that we have only 38 doctors of the church through our history, and four of those are women. And those women, I think, are just great examples. So we have Teresa of Avila, who I mentioned before. She's known for her writings on prayer and spirituality. We have Saint Therese of Lisieux. She's famous for her little way of spiritual childhood in her autobiography, Story of a Soul. St. Catherine of Siena, she's a mystic and an activist, and she played a significant role in the church's politics and wrote extensively on spiritual matters. And then St. Hildegard of Bingen, she was a visionary and a composer, and she contributed to theology, medicine, and music, and is known for her holistic approach to health. So I just when I read about them, I thought, wow, it just really covers this wide gamut, you know. Now, I will say, even though the specific sacramental role of priesthood is reserved for men, it doesn't mean that women cannot have leadership roles in the church. And I think we're starting to see that more so. For example, the current head of the Vatican City State is a religious sister, and some of the dicasteries have women as leaders now. So I think the presence of the role of women in the life of the mission of the church, although not linked to the ministerial priesthood, remains absolutely necessary and irreplaceable. So I think it's and I guess I'll leave it there. Maybe that's the best place to stop. It's right there.
Awesome. Thank you all. I'm mindful of the time. It is 4. Thank you all for joining us. I'll be sending this Zoom out so you all will have a copy of it. We're going to pick up again in 2 months. I'll be disseminating information if you guys want to come as listeners. But yeah, thank you all so much. Appreciate your time. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And
Thank
thank
Nice
you
meeting
to
you
my
all.
colleagues. I really appreciated being able to do this with you, and Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you all.
Salam
Thank you.
alaikum.
Bye.
Take care,
Bye,
everybody.
guys. Thanks.